all I have, Doctor. Thank you.
Cross-examination, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Ignacio.
Good morning.
My name is Will Cook, and I'm a defense attorney in this case. I'm going to ask some follow-up questions. Were you able to tell the blunt head trauma injuries, the three on the top of the head you were discussing? Can you tell the jury if those were post-mortem or pre-mortem?
They were pre-mortem.
Pre-mortem. And by that you mean before death?
Yes.
Okay. At one point during your investigation, were you kind of unsure whether the blunt force trauma had happened before or after Gannon had died?
No.
Okay. And the injuries that you noted in your report and during the autopsy, they would indicate that this was a violent death?
Yes.
Okay. Also, it looked like a lot of the injuries, the blunt force injuries, the sharp force injuries, it looks like it was just a random act, whereas there's no pattern to it. You have injuries to the head, you have injuries to the body. Some are deep, some are shallow. It indicates that this was a random attack, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There was no pattern to it.
Yes.
Okay. Would the blood force injuries, were they fatal by themselves?
Yes, they could be.
Okay. And you say the gunshot was fatal in and of itself as well?
Yes.
Okay. Did the bullet from the gunshot, I can't remember what you said, did it enter into the cranial vault?
It did not.
It did not. Okay. And the mechanism for death with the gunshot, it was that it severed the spinal cord or some vertebrae?
Yes.
Okay. And what would have been the mechanism for death with the blood force injuries? Would that have been bleeding or hemorrhaging in the brain? What would that have been?
Yes, there was hemorrhage in the brain.
Okay. When you're doing investigation and autopsies and looking at toxicology reports, did you go back, or did your office, or did you receive any information about whether Gannon had had a prescription for cough syrup or cough medicine that contained any hydrocodone?
No, I didn't inquire.
Okay. So it is possible that he could have had a medication or a prescription from a doctor to assist with the cough.
It's possible.
Okay. And if he had had a prescription for a opiate-based cough syrup or cough medicine, then it would follow that it would show up in his blood or his toxicology results.
Yes.
Okay. Could any of the injuries noted have happened? There's evidence that there was a suitcase that he was in. He was, the suitcase was thrown off an overpass of a highway near Pensacola. Is there any way that some of the injuries could have been caused by the impact of the suitcase hitting the ground?
Like which injuries?
The blunt force trauma injuries.
No, they were on the top of the head.
The top of the head?
No.
Okay. In a lot of injuries, doctor, you'll see stippling or powder burns on the skin where a bullet or a projectile enter. Did you note any of that, any of those type of injuries on Mr. Gannon?
I didn't see any stippling.
Okay.
It's also because of decomposition. I might not be able to see it.
And that was my next question. Would decomposition, even if it had originally been there, would it make that disappear or decay?
Maybe.
Maybe. So what I'm getting at is, were you able to make any type of conclusion as to the distance the gun was from the body when it was discharged?
No.
Okay. Were any of the sharp force injuries, were any of them in and of themselves fatal?
Because of the decomposition, I couldn't really tell. I mean, when I looked at the lungs, because I was thinking it would penetrate the lungs, I didn't see any injuries, but because there was decomposition, it was hard to see. So I couldn't really tell with the injuries that went into the chest cavity.
So I guess all you can say is it's possible. Is it possible that some or one or more of these sharp force injuries were fatal?
Yes, it could be fatal if left unattended.
Okay. And it looks like in your report, you look for organs, you remove some of them, you measure the contents of fluids in different organs and that sort of thing. It looks like in your report it mentions that you couldn't find a pancreas. Is that because Gannon did not have a pancreas, or because it had just decayed to the point of being able to identify it?
Yes, decomposition.
Composition. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of the organs and whatnot in Gannon, they had decayed to the point where you couldn't identify him anymore.
Yes.
Okay. And is that typical for a body that had the history of exposure to the elements?
Yes.
Okay. Just a moment, doctor. Hang on. Oh, thank you.
Redirect.
Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Cook was just asking you some questions about the sharp force injuries. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
And couldn't tell whether those could have been fatal on their own or not due to the decomposition.
Yes, but I think I said something I forgot. I couldn't tell, but then you could die from injuries into the chest cavity if left unattended.
Is that why you determined that the sharp force injuries were contributing factors to the death of Gannon Stauch?
Yes.
The fact that this body was put into a suitcase and thrown over a bridge, does that indicate to you that this was an attempt to hide this type of evidence, the evidence that we're finding from these injuries?
I'm going to object to speculation.
I think if you can lay a little bit of foundation about what expertise you might have in that regard.
Okay.
Let's try that first.
Yeah, sure. So, Doctor, when we're talking about investigations into deaths of persons, especially, I guess, in Florida where there's lots of waterways and that kind of thing, is it common to find bodies that have been disposed of into waterways or bayous or marshy areas in Florida?
Yes, we have had some deaths.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We have had some deaths found in bodies of water.
Is it typical in your expertise to find that a person may have been murdered in one place and then intentionally moved to another place like a waterway or bayou or marshy area to make it harder for authorities to find and examine the body?
Yes.
Okay. Was that apparent in this case? That
Yes.
a body had been moved some distance in mileage and then pitched over a bridge into a potentially marshy and watery area?
Yes.
And so does the fact that that occurred here indicate to you, in your expert opinion, that there was also the attempt to hide this body from authorities so it wouldn't be detected and examined to determine how this person died?
Yes.
Is that an intentional act?
Yes.
I would object.
Overruled.
You were asked by Mr. Cook about stippling. So let's talk, and so the jury understands what stippling is. Is stippling essentially powder burns on the surface of skin that would be caused by somebody shooting a gun at somebody in close proximity to that skin?
Yes, usually 2 inches to 2 feet from the skin. The gun would be 2 inches to 2 feet from the body, and so you would see the gunpowder leave marks, little pinpoint marks on the skin. These powder burns, are these expelled out of the barrel of the firearm when it's fired? Yes.
If somebody put a pillow between the gun and the victim, would that prevent stippling from appearing on skin?
Yes.
Did you, in your autopsy, also include a pillow and x-rays and find 2 bullets inside of that pillow?
Yes.
Mr. Cook started out by asking you about if these sharp force injuries and the blunt force injuries, if these appeared to be random acts. And I want to be clear, do you mean that these were just randomly happened to Gannon without somebody intentionally causing these injuries?
Can you repeat?
Yeah. Well, were these random injuries, or did somebody intentionally cause these injuries to Gannon?
Oh, it was intentional.
Okay, so when we say the word random, when Mr. Cook was asking you that, you don't mean that these were randomly happening with no rhyme or reason as to who or might be causing these injuries?
Yes, because he said there was no pattern, so I said there's no pattern.
Okay, and that's what I wanted to drive towards. These were intentional acts, as you just testified to. They did, though, target specific areas of Gannon's body, correct? It's not like these were injuries to his lower legs or toes or feet, correct?
Yes.
And so were these targeted towards upper body area, head area, chest area?
Yes.
Does that indicate a person had an intentional desire to cause potentially fatal injuries to Gannon
Yes.
because of where they're targeting?
Yes.
Is it more fatal to cause somebody an injury to their lower leg or to their head?
More to the head.
Okay. And Gannon had lots of injuries to his head, is that right?
Yes.
And all of these injuries, are these all the injuries that you talked about? 18 sharp force injuries, 4 blunt force injuries, and a gunshot wound to the chin that ultimately killed Gannon. Are all these pre-mortem injuries, meaning they happened while Gannon was still alive?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Do any of the jurors have any questions for Dr.?